Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and we're here today to talk about House of Chains, Book One, Faces in the Rock. And Layla is here with me today. Layla, how are you doing today? And will you give us a quick introduction?
I'm doing great. My name is Layla Goshi. I'm an English professor and writer, and normally can be found on Twitter. And just love reading fantasy, science fiction, and all related stuff. So
Yeah. Well, this I know we had kind of taken a break from the Malazan series because we had gone through the first three books. I think a little fast, but not too fast. But it kind of taken a little break. And Memories of Ice, I kind of got lost in it a little bit because I think there's so many characters that I just kind of started to I started to get a little bit confused, and Memories of Ice was kind of a struggle for me. But I absolutely loved this first part of this book one, and I think part of it is because we focused on one character, and
hmm
we didn't jump around very much. There's other characters that come in and out, but I found this to be. I think I engaged more with this section, and it's really funny. There's some great humor in this part too, and some really uh, not so funny things that happen too, but really droll, dry humor that's sprinkled in. What were your thoughts?
very similar thoughts. I really enjoyed, uh, this first section, and Karsa Orlong is really a great character.
Mm,
I think a very well drawn character with a lot of complexity, as all the characters are complex.
mm,
But I had some initial impressions of Karsa, and I'll just talk about those a bit. When I first read it, the first thing you think of, because I teach creative writing too, and we talk about how to handle archetypes in our writing, such as the hero. There are certain archetypes of literature like the hero, the wise woman, the wise old man, the witch, and, that kind of thing. So I always kind of think, who is this character? How does this character fit into that kind of thing? And other themes. And so, first, the first thing you immediately think of with Karsa is he's like this embodiment of the hero, you know
mm,
And then as I read throughout the first section, I started seeing him more as like, it was almost like one of those teenage coming of age stories where you set off into the wild world, and you have these hard knocks and these learning opportunities. So I kind of had that sense of him. And so, just actually, in terms of looking at art, looking at some fan art about Karsa, I one thing led to another, and I happened upon an essay by Stephen Erikson called "The Problem of Karsa Orlong," and I thought that it was just so interesting because I realized by reading this that it wasn't just a simple hero, uh, you know. Um, young man goes off to conquer the world type of trope, but he was really getting into something deeper, which I see and I agree with. And truthfully, if I had read, I think any of us, after you've probably read the whole series, you can come back and see these deeper themes more. But I really liked what he had to say in this essay. He's drawn Karsa as kind of the trope of the barbarian, that you know model idea of the noble barbarian, the noble savage. And so he said here, historically within the genre of epic fantasy, the role of the barbarians has roughly split into two morally laden strains. On the one hand, they are the dark horde threatening civilization, while on the other, they are the savage made noble by the absence of civilization. In the matter of Karsa Orlong, we can for the moment disregard the former and concentrate instead on the noble savage trope, such as barbarians are pure of spirit, unsullied and corrupt, while their justice may be rough, it is still just. So all of this, but then if you really think about what Karsa is doing all across, you know, the land on his way to the children, he's actually committing several immoral acts. And then his culmination, his dream is to go and kill who he calls children. So that's, again, already sets us up to start thinking about, well, what is noble? And so I just found that very interesting that it gave me a deeper idea about what uh,
Hmm.
Erikson was talking about. And then that's just a little bit more um, in his article. Erikson is talking about, well, what is civilized and what is barbarian.
Hmm.
Um, uh, as readers, we're taking it as we are the civilized ones reading about this barbarian, but yet, essentially in real life, there's barbaric acts in the real world too. So he's just kind of calling us with Carsa to think about all of these definitions.
Hmm.
Um, so that's just kind of a little exploration I went through. And for whatever critiques there are of Carson, I just really I still see him as that young man out to conquer the world and getting the hard knocks, and it is very humorous. Uh, Even as some things are horrible, it's very humorous. So,
And I wondered if the humor was just me getting used to the to the kind of the role that humor plays in this story, or if it was just more overt. I wasn't sure if that was just me kind of getting the hang of it because in Gardens of the Moon I didn't catch a lot of the humor until
mhm.
after. It took me a little while to kind of get in the groove of what he was trying to do. But so I wondered that about humor.
I think it was more obvious here. I do
Hmm.
think there are elements of like dark humor throughout the books we've read so far. But it's the banter, I think, a little bit with his own, um, you know, uh, friends, from the village. There's a little bit of that banter, but it's not as intense or as funny as it is with Torvald Nom,
Hmm.
who's very talkative and just opens the door for all kinds of funny responses from Karsa.
So, in your opinion, do we need um, humor in stories like this? Do you think that we need some type, a little bit of a break in because it is a dark story, and they're all this they're bringing this violence, and they're out to conquer the world, and they have these bad intentions. Do you think as readers we need a break sometimes? Do we need humor sprinkled in?
I think so. I also think it humanizes the characters and sometimes it exposes a character's weakness in a
Hmm.
sense. Well, strengths and weaknesses. So um but overall I think it humanizes, and yeah, it does give us a break. But I usually always find myself sitting back and thinking about the humanity that caused um, that character to get into the predicament they're in
Hmm.
and
Interesting.
respond the way they are. Yeah. So I had also, just as a note, as soon as I read the last few sentences of the last part of book one, um, he said, I should have put the last part of book one up here too, but there's a reference to, in fact, I'm going to find that right now and talk about what he says. Um, Carson meets a man. This is at the last section of book one in House of Chains, and the man says, "I am named Leoman. And the one I serve, the chosen one to whom I will deliver you. She is Shaik. I am no one's servant," Karsa said. "This chosen one, she dwells in the desert before us. in its very heart, Toblakai, and Raruka, Raraku's very heart. Not talking well today. So he references Shaikh, who we met. So Karsa is actually the guardian of Sheikh the Elder from Deadhouse Gates.
Hmm.
So when Sheikh was killed and ultimately Felice replaced her, the Sheikh, the elder that was killed, was guarded by a Toblakai, also known as Karsa. Um, we don't know his name at the time. It says he's seen 17 summers and has personally killed 41 enemies. That was in Deadhouse Gates. So
Hmm.
by that, we know Karsa, for all he's going through, is about 17 years old.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't either because I said, okay, Toblakai, Shaikh, what's that? So I went back to my Kindle and one thing I do like about Kindle books, you can do a search. So I started doing a search of Toblakai and then come to find out um, it was back when we read Dead House Gates. Um,
Hmm.
Karsa was actually one of the guardians of Shaikh the Elder, and
Hmm.
Leoman, I guess, was his companion. So, yeah,
So these events in House of Change happened before Dead House Gates?
apparently, yes, yes. And so I will go forward reading um, Malazan with that in mind,
Mm-hmm.
that, characters we met previously. Well, we already know that uh, many of the characters do have multiple names, you know,
Yeah.
like Shaikh the Younger and, Shaikh who is Felisan, and so Kars is another one who's also known as Toblakai in Dead House Gates. And so, yeah, we've kind of circled back to previous time,
Huh.
and just seeing how Karsa, how what he set off to do.
Yeah, in the beginning when they were talking about killing children, I thought they were going to go to villages and there's children there, but it's I kind of saw them as like hobbits or like Kithkin or is that kind of what you had in your mind too of the children?
That's what I had in my mind at the beginning. Um, and really up through looking for fan art, to be honest. And then I realized that he must be referring to what we would call average sized people, because Karsa is drawn as just like this giant of a person, you know. But I think, not I think, but Erikson also mentions that in his essay, that using the word children, it calls our attention to Karsa's goals. And as we're reading, we don't realize that um, he's just talking about what he calls lowlanders, who are just regular sized people, and he's the giant.
Yeah.
So,
I think there's a few I think other characters reference his size a few times and that's when you start to kind of know that he's larger than we would like,
yeah,
5 or 6 feet kind of thing.
yeah, right. And but it also indicates several things about Karsa's personality and the village, if they are freely referencing these other people as children, um, in their mind, um, and in their mind they deserve to be killed. There is a barbaric, brutal aspect to that,
Hmm.
because they have children of their own. Uh, but here he is setting off on this quest to kill other children who are strangers. just
Hmm.
because in his mind it's a noble goal to fulfill what his grandfather supposedly started.
Yeah, I love that too. That his grandfather had this story of, he was this conqueror, and so later you find out that he was actually nursed back to health, and he kind of took advantage of them, and he kind of, so I like that what he thought happened didn't happen the way he thinks it does. It did.
Right. I thought that was a very significant moment, in that, um, yeah, his grandfather's nursed back to health. But in the end, if I recall correctly, his grandfather did end up killing a few of them
Mm.
before coming back, and indicating sort of this sense of pride of what he should be. The grandfather should, grandfather thinking of himself, he should be out there conquering and slaughtering, and then coming back to talk about his exploits and show off his pieces of ear and so on. And Carson just buys into it, but Carson's father knows all along that it's just a fake story, and so doesn't respect the grandfather for that reason. But Carsa, misinterprets it, thinks his father's the weak one, and the grandfather is the strong one within their, you know, reasoning of what is weak and what is strong.
And I thought the fact that the children didn't kill Karsa when they trapped him, they
Ah,
could have killed him. But they didn't. And I thought that spoke to they took mercy on him after he had just ran rampant through their village, or he killed countless children, and they still didn't kill him.
right. And again, that kind of is getting us into this sense of what is civilized and what is not. Um, and so his first introduction to them is our concept of civilization, of being offered mercy, being allowed to live after horrific acts. Um, and so I think that's interesting because the first meeting does seem to be the brute versus the civilized. Um, and so we've got a clear, either or there. But then as you get further into his experience with, first, I forget the name of the village, but first the lowlanders, and later, will meet the Malazans.
Hmm.
Um, it starts to blur, it's going to start to blur as who's the civilized and who's not, who
Hmm.
has the moral high ground.
Yeah.
I'm not sure anybody does.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I think that's what's really intriguing about it is you don't know who has the moral high ground.
right.
You go back and forth with it.
Yeah,
Um, but I did like the banter of the three that set out. Was it Karsa, Dilum, and Bayroth?
right.
They always had this uneasy agreement. You could tell that they weren't really friends. They didn't have this affinity for each other. They were just on a they were there for a purpose. They weren't there for each other necessarily.
Right. I think in each case they were there for themselves too, to achieve a certain honor, and they doubted. There were, interestingly, the whole concept of doubt was brought up by, and yes, I've forgotten his name. Is it Bear?
Uh, is it? It's Bairoth. I think it's Bayroth. Is that?
Bayroth. Yeah, that's right, Bayroth. And Bayroth wants him to doubt, wants him, and Karsa does not take that well. And, it's very interesting. Their motto is "Lead me, war leader." But as time goes on, you start to see that the war leader really doesn't have a clue, you know. And I found very interesting that. um, you also start to see through Karsa's bluff over time. Like he'll say, like with the three-legged dog,
Hmm.
says, "This I swear, this dog will rest on my hearth someday," and then the dog is killed,
Yeah.
and you start to realize, it's really not going according to how he thinks it's going. I just thought that was done really well, and that's dark humor to me in a way, or I look at that very um, not burst out laughing, but just like, yeah, okay.
Yes.
So
And the dogs. Speaking of the dogs,
yeah,
uh, after they release the demon in the cave, and they find in the cave, they also find that. So, if I understood it right, they had a bloodline that they tried to dilute. They tried to dilute their bloodline and try and spread it out.
yeah.
Am I getting that right? Because that was a little bit hazy for me.
About the demon.
Yeah, and the writing in the cave where they found the writing of they found some other
Yeah.
names in the cave. Yeah.
Yes. And that's what they that's what they were doing. They had become too isolated and insulated, and yes, that person had tried to mix, I guess, DNA and sent them, created new tribes and just sent them out. And Karsa just would not hear of that, you
Hmm.
know. And that really actually reminded me, that is a theme that I've read in other science fiction, where the civilization thinks they're one. They think their origins are one thing, but actually turns out it's something completely different. And so I love that because again, Carson didn't believe it at first, but um, it just it inserts that little seed of doubt of maybe he doesn't know his culture as well as he thinks he does. Maybe he doesn't know his people as well, the history of his people
Hmm.
as well as he thinks he does. So
Hmm.
it just helps us all start thinking. I mean, us as readers start thinking about that.
And I also wondered if the children were somehow related or in the same bloodline as when they did spread out and try to create new villages and if the children are somehow related along the line.
That's a great question. I'm not sure, but that might be something I'd look for because just keeping just in keeping with the isolation, I think, of the various peoples, that's more than likely the case as well. And so, and that yet again would be something that Karsa's people would need to learn and understand.
Hmm.
Yeah. But I also want to mention this, speaking of um, the cultural history that Karsa, you know, came, how can I put this? The doubt about cultural history that is inserted because of what they read in the cave. It mirrors his own personal history with his father and his grandfather. So it's like he's questioning everything, or he should be questioning everything. I don't think he's there yet. He should be questioning everything, you know, as to what he was told. And so, that's something, a theme of Erikson I really like, that, about looking back at history again and trying to really tease out what is really, happening.
Hmm.
And I would parallel that with what we're watching in House of the Dragon right now. It's the same idea of, Targaryen history written by three different people, in the book, and then trying to decide, well, what is the real history, you
Hmm.
know? So I think that's a great theme. I think Erikson is doing it on a very deep level, and it's It's really great. So
You wonder how he keeps track of everything. There's just so many strings.
right, right. I wonder. I haven't looked into a lot of whether he discusses his approach to writing. I'm sure he must. Um, but just in terms of writing in general, I think many writers do set up like even charts and graphs. What string is this character following and what string. So I'd be curious to know if that's something he does.
Hmm.
Um,
Just so much
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. I before we kind of leave the history thing, I wanted to mention too something about Carsa. He says something about his father that his father didn't try to convince him of anything. He thinks my father just let me go out. He's mad at his father for letting him go out to find out for himself, you know.
Hmm.
And um, and I kind of agree with him. But then, okay, if he were 25, maybe, but a 16, 17-year old, sit down, have a talk before you take off. So that's me criticizing the dad, not criticizing. I think it's wonderfully presented by Erikson, that point.
Yeah, and the interaction between the dad and the grandfather after they leave, that I
Yeah,
thought that he throws him out of his house and doesn't ever speak to him again.
yeah. And, thinking on that now, I wonder if if it's not only because uh, the grandfather was responsible for Karsa going off on, you know, um, what's probably going to be an ill-fated trip. And but also, I wonder if the father really sees the weakness in the grandfather of having to boast to cover up his exploits, um, and maybe the father considers that a weakness. So
Hmm. I'm assuming the dad knows the truth about what really happened. Is that the impression you had too?
that's what I'm assuming. And what I also got from some of the text was that the Karsa's mother knew the truth, and so had, I guess, convinced Karsa's father to go a different direction,
Hmm.
to not be out there being a war leader, but, staying closer to home, doing what he needed to do. And because the grandfather had some criticism of Karsa's mother, as I recall in the text.
Hmm.
And so partly it was the mother's influence, Karsa's mother's influence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and also wondered why if the dad knew why he didn't just tell him, or he didn't try to stop him before he went out on this adventure.
See, and that's a key point to me because I see that as okay, bad parenting. No, I see that as really kind of having a resentment toward his son, you know, and that kind of got to me, I think, in a good way, as a reader. But it got to me that is the father resenting that Karsa doesn't follow him um, without question.
Hmm.
So the father saying, "Okay, if you think you're so smart, you go do what you're going to do," you know. So so it can really it really gets yeah, complex and dysfunctional. um,
Yeah.
put the fun
Yes.
in dysfunctional, as they say. So yeah,
Yeah. I don't know if the children would agree with the fun part, but
right, right, right.
yeah. And the uh, the cave demon, um, they referenced it as the Fork of Saul.
Uh-huh.
Have we seen that before? I wasn't sure about that either.
I didn't have time to check back on that. And just from my initial impression, I was trying to figure out if the demon is a Talanamas,
Mm.
or because one thing, and I may need to check on that. Maybe next session we can kind of revisit that. But Karsa at one point makes another one of his declarations and says, the Talanamas are my sworn enemy, and he doesn't even know who they are. And then they go and release this being that they're calling a demon. Um, and so um, I really, my impression was, is this being a Jaghut, which is the enemy of the Talanamas,
Mm-hmm.
or is it a, a Talanamas? So something to look forward to in the future, finding out more. But my impression right now is that him making that declaration and then releasing this demon, I feel like they're closely connected. And this may be another declaration where he has to back off or cannot fulfill, you know, that declaration.
Yeah, I think the demon makes a reference to. I think he references Karsa being special or being important in some way. So
Uh,
that's why. And then we kind of learn later that he heals fast. He recovers quickly. So I wonder if there's something special about Karsa that, because most people wouldn't survive all the things he's been through. So I wonder if there's something special about him that he has some kind of protection or he has special abilities.
yeah. I think because of the title House of Chains, and I'm starting to understand that house can mean the Warren or connection with a spirit or a god. I think we're headed somewhere in that direction.
Hmm.
And something I looked at with the Toblakai and how Dead House Gates, at one point, Heboric, the you know uh, the failed priest that doesn't have hands, that's with Felison, he made some comment to the Toblakai, who is Karsa, that he was dragging those he killed uh, behind him in chains or something like that.
Hmm.
So there must be some, you know, uh, he must have opened some connection for himself to a Warren or a god by being in that cave and releasing that demon or
Hmm.
whatever it was. I
Yeah.
guess soon to find out. So there's something there. Yeah, definitely that's a key moment. And once we get through the rest of the book, I might go back and look at that again. I feel like Erikson has set something up there for us to go back to.
Yeah. And when they do find the demon and release it, I thought it was the way that it was described and it was being watched by these other. They would come and check on it and make sure that it's still there. And when they let it go and the demon attacks, was it Delim,
Yeah,
and he becomes he must have hit his head and he starts to um, the way I understood it was he kind of thought he was a dog. Is that he
yeah,
kind of yeah
yeah. He lost
it's
his brain um, liquid, or
yeah
yeah,
yeah leaking brain fluid or brain liquid.
yeah,
Yeah.
brain fluid. So he thought of himself as a dog, um, and seemed to be quite happy. And so, thinking again of um, brutal natures and civilization, I think we're going somewhere with that, with, Delum. Is that the name?
I think yeah it's Delum.
DL, yeah, Delum. So I think um, kind of bringing one of them back to a very essential, nature of the wolf. uh,
Hmm.
and Running with the Wolves, which is, again, we've got that trope in other things. So like in Wheel of Time, there's a character who ends up running with the wolves and running off with them.
Hmm.
But in this setting, I think it just really exacerbates that theme of, the noble savage versus civilization again. And Dellum has taken it far into that range now. So yeah. And it also says something about losing, if you do lose your mind. I mean, the mind is a civilizer. So
Hmm.
when you've lost that, you're reduced to this essential nature.
Oh wow.
It's just some things to think about. I'm not sure where it's going, but
Yeah, I thought that was
yeah,
interesting. And
yeah,
Bayroth, when they are captured by the children, Bayroth has a chance to he has a chance to give them information to save himself, and he doesn't.
right.
And uh, Karsa feels like he gave up on him, like he left him to die. He would rather die than help him because they
Yeah,
had this back and forth and this bitterness, this tension between them. So he would rather die than do anything to help him.
that Bayroth would rather die
Hmm.
to do. I found that very interesting because Bayroth, from all standards of war and friendship and everything else, loyalty to one's village, you're not going to give away any information.
Right.
And it seemed that Karsa was just totally befuddled by that behavior, and so it just showed different, again, different personalities, I think, in that trio that set out. And so, you know, so I think Bayroth died feeling betrayed by Karsa, even while Karsa felt betrayed by Bayroth. And his last words, Bayroth's last words were, lead me, war leader, but it was said in like a very critical way, And and Karsa still didn't get it, you know.
No, because I thought that was a noble thing to do is to not give information away and to kind of go
Right.
down. Yeah, so that's to. But I think Karsa, I wondered, does he not want to be alone? Was he hurt because he was so attached to them that he didn't want to be by himself?
That's a great point. Um, and that's something that comes up later. One of my favorite quotes. Well, it's later in the book because I've read a little bit ahead, so I'll just say this. But he comes to a point where he realizes the difference between friendship, allies and followers.
Hmm.
And um, he considered Delim and Bayroth his followers still, because he wanted them to say to him, "Lead me." So he wanted to be the leader and have them as followers. And it's only when Bayroth dies that he realizes, no, he wasn't an ally because he didn't stay with me.
Hmm.
He chose to die instead of stay with me. I mean, from his interpretation, that's what makes it such a great written scene, because it's from Karsa's interpretation, that
Yeah.
Bayroth wasn't his friend and didn't stay loyal to him because he wants that emotional connection. But then Bayroth, um, he did what we would consider a very noble thing, like we just said, which is protect your village, protect your people, um, and protect those you love by not saying anything. So
Yeah. Yeah. That didn't go the way I expected it. I expected uh, Karsa to not give any information, to just refuse and to, but it went the opposite of what I thought it would. So that was and
yeah,
like you said, his reaction was not what I expected either. So
right. So, and now knowing that he's like 16 or 17 at that point, you know, that's what brought me back to thinking he's on kind of this coming of age, learn about the world journey. He's just causing a whole lot of destruction, as he does it, and it's great.
Yeah, quite a bit. There
Yeah,
was a there was a quote that I had written down, and I'm reading on a Kindle because I can't read trade paperback. I
yeah.
can't do it, so
Oh,
I'm reading
same.
on Kindle. Yeah. Are you the same?
I'm the same. Yeah, the smaller books, I just, it's too hard to hold them and keep this page open, and yeah, so I like Kindle for that reason.
Yeah. So I've been reading digital, so I don't know the exact page, but
Yeah,
there's a quote that I wrote down: "The fever of madness knows no friends."
that's great.
Yeah.
That is great.
And
Yeah,
I think that kind of encapsulates the whole first book is um, because they start out together and then he keeps going through people and was it Torvald? I love that character. Such a
I
great
do too.
character. Such a great character.
Yeah,
When they're in the when they're I think in the ship and or they're attached to the log and they're he asks them to turn it so they can drown and they'd rather and he starts to turn it and people down the line start to go underneath and then at the very last minute Torvald's oh hold on a second and he's
mhm.
still little moments like that really great.
Changed his mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, and from a reading standpoint, I was happy to come upon Torvald because he's from Darujistan,
Hmm.
and it helped me kind of reconnect back into the Malazan side of things. And so even as he's building a friendship with Karsa, we're also getting some information on what's been going on, in the rest of the region. Um, and it just, to me, kind of helps create the world a bit
Hmm.
more. We've got Karsa's drama going on over here in this one little corner of the world. And meanwhile, this whole big campaign that he's not even aware of is going on, you know, out there in the big world. And sooner or later, they're going to meet and collide, as we know from Deadhouse Gates.
It's interesting. I think now that you mention it and now that we're talking about it, so I think they reference the events of Gardens of the Moon in. I think one of the characters talks about it. So
Yeah,
so are these events that we're reading now happening while the events of Gardens of the Moon are happening? Is that? I guess that would make sense. But
yeah, and I'm really still trying to figure that out. Um, but it does seem like we're back in the past in regard to the first books we've read,
mhm.
and um, and just from this first section, I'm not quite sure what that timeline is.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I was a little bit afraid to do too much looking into it because I don't want to get spoiled in the rest of the book. But yeah, so I'm glad that you I did because I did not catch that it's the same. It was referenced in Deadhouse Gates.
yeah. And really, I need to go back and read about Genabacchus again because there are several references made by Torvald, and I still need to go back and study that. This is definitely a series I will read twice. I will.
Yeah,
Um, I want to fully understand all the characters, and I think that's what's needed with this book, this series.
when you now that you mention that during while I was reading this first part,
Mhm.
I was trying to remember names and trying to see if anything would kind of spark a memory. But I started thinking I should go back and reread all the
Yeah.
books back. So because there's just so much stuff, and I don't know if it's like I said about the points of view
Mhm.
not switching up too much, but I Erikson's writing and this I don't know what if it's because of the we focused on this one character and his journey, but I just fell in love with it. It just I don't know I don't know how he does it, but
Yeah. Oh yeah. I feel the same way. And I think both um, both approaches work. You know, um, yes, it, Gardens of the Moon. I read that on faith, and I did understand many events happening in Gardens of the Moon. I was able, to understand basically what was going on. But it is also very helpful to have this one extended story of a character with additional elements of the world coming in. I think this was a good time for us to stop as readers and have one continuous section to focus on,
Hmm.
and help us go back. So I like both approaches, in this book. But now that I realize what's going on, you know, I think it's going to help me going forward in terms of thinking, okay, well, maybe what I'm reading now does have a link to something I've already read. So let me think about that a little more.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's
It's, were you were you surprised, or were you? I guess I should say, were you happy or disappointed that Torvald survived?
Oh, I'm happy because I think, yeah, I think he has many more miles to go, and I want to see what happens. And I don't know what's going to happen with him and Karsa, going forward, but I hope to see some kind of um, like reestablishment of connections. But the way it seems to happen in this series is, uh, it could be like Felicin and her sister, crossing paths.
Hmm.
I mean, there's so many great situations where people are crossing paths but don't realize who they're actually with, you know. So it could turn out that way too.
Yeah, I could. But I was so bummed when I thought he died, and I didn't think he would.
Yeah,
I didn't, and because especially with all the other companions that he's had, all the other followers that have died, I thought, okay, he's.
yeah,
I guess that's it. Is a little bit bummed out. So I was happy to see him come back. I'm usually not happy when that happens, but Torvald, I was happy he survived.
yeah. And he's not the first because trying to think of in the first book, we lost a character, and I was um, really disappointed in that. Now I'm trying to remember the name of the character, but he fell into a warren and then reemerged, like in Dead House Gates, I think. So now I'll have to look up that character again. I was so fixated on that for a while too. But that's another great style of Erikson. They can kind of weave in and out of this long narrative.
And you said you've gone a little bit ahead. Does the same style, does it continue on, or do we go back to different points of view?
Um, Pretty much the same style all the way through.
Hmm.
I really can't remember if there's another point of view, but it does make sense. Um, having the book start out this way with Karsa helped everything else make sense. And yeah, and I can't remember. I read this book in full in, what are we in, October? It was probably August, and then I just reread book one.
Oh
But
wow.
honestly, I got more out of it the second time through,
Hmm.
and so either way, I think, every book, it has to be a double read. So I'll probably keep rereading. I'll probably keep reading as we go
Cool.
through this. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Anything else stand out to you in this first book?
Um, nothing that I can think of. Uh, Nothing else, I think, so far. I'm sure I'll think of it, you
As soon
know,
as we're done. Yeah.
as soon as we're done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only thing I think that we haven't talked about yet is the prologue. The
Mhm.
prologue. I don't know. So go ahead.
It was. And my only guess at this point is it does tie in with the seven faces and the tribes and the demon. Um, and I did wonder the if that person were also the writer in the cave, the person who wrote in the cave. So I'm not sure.
Oh.
I'm not sure though at all. Um, so that's just a question. Even having read through the whole book once, so that's again an outstanding question for me.
I wondered because that as I was reading through book one, I thought that that would be Karsa at the
Uh,
beginning in the prologue, but so who knows? I'm not sure. Yeah, it's interesting
yeah,
because they don't have it. They don't name the person, right?
right. They don't. And there's also I think a child that um, they also laid to rest there
Mm-hmm.
or had previously.
Mm.
But I do think
Interesting.
it relates to the cave somehow. I just haven't parsed that out yet.
Mm. Well, I'm ready to find out. Anxious to find
Yeah,
out.
and this is the kind of book where you're like, shopping at the grocery store and sitting there trying to think, okay, yeah, you know,
Yeah,
it pops in your head at odd times,
it
just
does.
these little details. So
Yeah, they do.
great.
And there's just so many characters, but they find a way to live with you for a while.
Right.
Yeah, really really good stuff. Well, awesome. I'm looking forward to book two. We'll find a day and a time, but in the meantime, if someone wants to connect with you, where's the best place to find you?
Right now, on Twitter at El Goshi, and um, hope to have a website open soon.
Also, looking forward to reading it.
I
That's
keep saying that.
yeah. No, it'll happen. These things take time, so yeah,
They do.
yeah. Well, cool. Well, we'll let everyone know when this the book two will be. We'll find a day and a time, but in the meantime, hope everyone has a good day, and we'll talk to everyone soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, Steve.